The person who returned waltz to the planet was André Rieu, the Dutch virtuoso who brought classical music from opulent concert halls, outdoors and filled stadiums on 6 continents, with the sound of violins rising over the din of 100,000 people. He created the Johann Strauss Symphony, the most successful touring symphony in history, and transformed it into a sensation that no music executive could have predicted with his trademark white bow tie, cascade of silver hair, and seemingly ironic smile. At his height, almost 2 million people paid to stand beneath the stars and listen to his music every year. Instead of crying over sadness, cry over something less common. Acknowledgement, the sense that they had not missed the arrival of beauty. However, the tale behind that legacy is one of quiet devastation rather than glamour. A tale of growing up under a father's expectations for a long time, of a marriage that had been pushed to its breaking point by decades of constant touring, of a body worn down by thousands of performances over the course of 40 years, and of a loss so intimate that not even the warmth of the audience could truly touch it. For decades, the world has celebrated his happiness, but few have paused to consider the cost of his continued smiles. If you have ever been captivated by the sound of André Rieu's violin in a music hall, a movie, or on a screen at midnight when everything seemed too quiet, please leave a like to honor the man who refused to let beauty be reserved for the wealthy. It is a sobering fact that the crushing weight of a reputation he had not yet earned, rather than freedom, marked the beginning of this legend. On October 1, 1949, André Léon Marie Nicolas Leroux was born in Maastricht, a city of ancient spires and cobblestone squares tucked away at the very point of the Netherlands, with Belgium and Germany's borders pressing close on each side like old neighbors leaning over a fence. It was a city that was deeply rooted in music. The hours were announced by church bells. On feast days, military bands marched across the squares. Furthermore, music was neither a pleasure nor a hobby in the Rieu home. It was oxygen. As the leader of the Maastricht Symphony Orchestra, his father, Johann Rieu, held a position of great local prominence that caused outsiders to straighten their posture when they shook your hand. Jan was a precise man, yet he wasn't nasty dot in the same way that a carpenter believes in the proper angle. He believed in discipline. Everything finally falls apart without it. He exercised the same restrained power on the podium that he did with his family. Dinner was planned. Practice was unavoidable. The only acceptable benchmark was excellence, and failing to meet it was not mentioned. It was just not allowed. André grew up in a home full with expectations and aspirations. He was the 5th of 6 children. The violin was given to him as a task rather than a gift as soon as he was able to hold a bowl. He was 4 years old. The world expected him to become proficient with the instrument, which was almost as tall as he was. Later on, he would remember with the measured honesty of a man who had long since reconciled with his past. My dad never had to speak out. After a mistake, the silence was sufficient punishment. One of the most distinctive sounds of his early years was that absolute, frigid, and precise quiet. Not silence, not encouragement, not applause, the type that lets a young child know how far he still has to go. There were certain cruelties at school. André attended a Jesuit-run secondary school where music was valued but not honored. Because he was the conductor's son, he was always held to a higher standard than everybody else and had less sympathy. When a classmate faltered on a scale, they were kindly corrected. André was held to a level that did not allow for the typical faults of boyhood, bearing his father's name around his neck like a stone. He was not allowed to be ordinary. Nevertheless, he was just average for a significant portion of his adolescence. A quiet youngster who had yet to discover the inner force that would eventually fill stadiums, a capable student, and a hard-working violinist. Talent was not the only thing that rescued him. It was obstinacy. The same trait that his father had attempted to instill in him had emerged in a way that Johann had not expected. André had no desire to use quiet as a technique as a conductor of a symphony. He desired to be more approachable and palatable to the audience. When he was younger, he had gone to his father's concerts and seen the rows of well-dressed spectators sitting rigidly in their seats, afraid to breathe too loudly, clapping at the appropriate times with a constrained precision of people expressing their gratitude rather than experiencing it. It was oppressive to him. It's not the music. The ceremonial surrounding the music, the distance, and the imperceptible barrier separating the audience's souls from the stage were all transcendent. A seed was sown by that discomfort. Decades would pass before it blossomed. But even at the age of 14, André Rieu silently concluded that when the music was his to create, it would never feel that way after witnessing his father perform the Mastery Symphony in front of courteously applauding strangers. He was still unable to explain the revolution he intended. All he knew was what he didn't want. Understanding what you are escaping can often be just as powerful as understanding what you are chasing in the grand architecture of life. He left home to study at the Liège Conservatory in Belgium, then continued on at the Royal Conservatory of Brussels, and lastly at the Mastery Conservatory, gaining degrees and technique in the meticulous, systematic manner that his family had taught him. He was a skilled concert violinist by his mid-20s, well-respected, disciplined, and almost unknown outside of the exclusive realm of Dutch classical music. He wasn't exceptionally talented. He wasn't a phenomenon. He was a young man with an exact bow arm, a vivid imagination, and an ambition so unrealistic that no one in his immediate vicinity had the fortitude to support it. However, the youngster who had grown up in the quiet between his father's demands was already learning how to fill the void with something that the world had not yet demanded. Everyone in his immediate vicinity thought André Rieu's actions in 1987 were, at best, strange and at worst, financially disastrous. He started an orchestra of his own, not in small recital spaces with a chamber group of 6 or 8 musicians. It's not a string quartet looking to live at a local conservatory. He put together a full orchestra of 12 players. All of them were costumed in period attire and dedicated to a repertory that was no longer being performed by anyone in the professional classical world. Waltzes, polkas, operatic overtures, and the music of Josef Strauss, Johann Strauss, and Franz Lehár, music that the establishment had discreetly put on hold because it was too well-liked, too sentimental, and too easy for discerning listeners. Before concert halls deemed it unworthy, the general public had enjoyed this music for a century. Almost no one showed up when he called it the Johann Strauss Orchestra. The initial shows took place in tiny spaces all around the Netherlands, including community centers, church halls, and small theaters with flimsy acoustics and folding chairs. The orchestra gave a fantastic performance. There weren't many people there. The enterprise was labeled by critics who took the time to notice it with a special brutality, reserved for low-status ambition. They described it as lovely, approachable, and pleasant. Each and every one of those statements was intended to be dismissive. Accessible was not a compliment in the world of classical music. It was a decision. It indicated that you weren't sincere. It implied that you were out of place. André took in those judgments in the same way that he had taken in his father's silence, when he was a young boy, not with surrender, but with something more subdued and resilient. Decide. This orchestra was not something he had constructed to appease critics. He had constructed it for the woman in the third row, who was listening to Strauss for the first time and was unaware that smiling was permitted. The retired school teacher in the rear, who had always believed that classical music was not for people like him, was the reason he had built it. He had created it for everyone who had ever been made to feel that beauty required a password, They had never been given and stood outside the velvet rope of high culture. The pivotal moment did not occur in a single spectacular moment. It came gently at first, then all at once, like the tides. Concert by concert, city by city, handshake by handshake. The Johann Strauss Orchestra grew its fan base during the late 1980s and early 1990s. During performances, André made it a habit to walk into the audience, play his violin among the crowd instead of above it, conduct, clear his throat with laughter instead of severity, and invite singers who performed in costume and with a theatrical flair that no conservatory had ever taught or would have approved of. The wall that had choked him during his father's concerts, the one between the stage and the audience, started to crumble. Only sincere feeling has the power to spread word. By 1994, the Johann Strauss Orchestra was selling out theaters all over the Netherlands, not through record, label machinery, or advertising campaigns, but by people telling others, "You have to see this. You have to hear this. You will cry and you will not be embarrassed." They were packing concert halls in Austria, Belgium, and Germany by 1996. In 1998, tens of thousands of people flocked from all over Europe to sit under the summer sky and lose themselves in the music of violins while André Rieu performed on the stage of the Vrido, the expansive open plaza in the center of his city of Maastricht. André's closest friends and family will remember that night as the moment he realized what he had created. A colleague who had been with the symphony since its inception made a discreet confession. After the last bow, he stood at the edge of the stage and simply gazed out at the plaza. He remained silent for a considerable amount of time. Later, with unusual quiet, he confessed, "I had been trying to introduce people to music for years. I realized that night that the music had always been theirs. The door was only opened by me. Once that door opened, it would never shut again." The Maastricht performances became into an annual pilgrimage in just 2 years. They were seen on television in 17 nations in less than 5 years. The youngster who had studied music under his father's silent criticism had produced something that no one in his father's world could have predicted: a classical empire based on welcome rather than exclusion, on delight, not on quiet, the weeping of the many, not the approval of the few. André Rieu passed the invisible line that divides the man who tries from the man who transforms, somewhere in the math of that miracle. In the increasing ticket sales, the expanding orchestra, and the growing number of countries on the tour schedule. Without anyone being able to pinpoint the exact moment, he had turned into a phenomenon. What transpired next was in violation of every law that the music industry thought would last forever. André Rieu didn't just develop. Through the late 1990s and the first decade of the new century, he continued to proliferate. The Johann Strauss Orchestra grew so quickly from a Dutch curiosity to a worldwide institution that record businessmen, concert organizers, and classical music specialists were unable to come up with a framework to contain it. No one in the industry had created a vocabulary for the story that the figures revealed. André Rieu was the world's top seller of classical music records by 2002. Not more than other Dutch musicians or waltz performers, but more than any living classical recording artist, even those with huge label contracts, decades of institutional support, and the entire weight of conservatory renown behind their names. His 2001 CD Romantic Moments sold more than 2 million copies worldwide. In 2004, the album Moonlight had simultaneous chart appearances in 14 different countries. With an annual concert revenue of over $100 million, he was listed by Billboard magazine as the highest paid classical musician in the world by 2007. He was no longer competing in classical music. He was the only person who lived in the category he had made. As the empire expanded, so did the Johann Strauss Orchestra. It began with just 12 musicians in 1987 and grew to a touring group of 140 performers, including singers, dancers, technicians, costume designers, and a production staff that toured across 6 continents with the accuracy of a military operation. Just the logistics were overwhelming. The stage equipment was transported by 40 semi-trucks. Custom-built sets were created to turn the flooring of the world's biggest venues into the ballrooms of Vienna in the 19th century. A group of seamstresses who worked year-round on nothing else created costumes by hand at mastery workshops. André himself controlled, approved, and personally oversaw every aspect, including the chandelier hanging over the stage, the candelabras surrounding the orchestra, and the exact shade of cream in the violinists' robes, because the empire was a vision rather than merely a company, and André Rieu served as its marketing division, creative director, architect, and spiritual leader all at once. That dominion came with an almost unfathomably intense touring schedule. The Johann Strauss Orchestra played 112 concerts on 4 continents in 2008 alone. In Australia, a Dutch violinist named André had become an almost unexplainable phenomenon, selling out the Sydney Entertainment Centre for 5 straight nights, while the nation's own rock artist could barely fill half the seats. For performances that were still 8 months away, fans set up camp outside ticket offices. The trend recurred with the consistency of a natural rule in South Africa, Brazil, Japan, New Zealand, Mexico, and music in the United States. The throngs arrived, they shed tears. When he played the Blue Danube, they danced in the aisles. They raised their kids above the throng so they could see. Flowers were delivered and thrown upon the stage. The next year, they returned with their buddies. André Rieu was the most successful touring musician in the world by 2010. And he wasn't associated with any pop or rock bands. One of the most popular music events on the European summer calendar was his yearly Master Concerts, which were staged in July in the Vredo Square under open sky with the medieval city as his backdrop. Within minutes of the release, all of the tickets were sold out. In order to relax on folding chairs in a Dutch city square and enjoy waltzes performed beneath the stars, fans traveled by plane from South America, Australia, and the United States. Mastery hotel reservations were made up to a year in advance. Similar to how small coastal communities change around a once-a-year festival, the city's economy changed around the performances. However, the annual local revenue from this festival was anticipated to be $40 million. André didn't exactly talk proudly about these figures. He spoke of them with a tone that was more akin to amazement, with a hint of unease that he had never quite been able to get rid of. He had been raised in a home where music was revered as a discipline, and now he was the one who had turned it into the focal point of an entertainment empire that encompassed live recordings, souvenirs, DVD sales, television broadcasts, and a devoted fan club with more than 300,000 members across 40 countries. Later, he acknowledged with the cautious candor that had always characterized his infrequent moments of openness. There are moments when I look at everything and wonder if my father would have considered it music at all, and then the audience starts crying. Indeed, I believe he would have comprehended it. The secret to comprehending everything that came next is the tension in that confession. André Rieu had created something truly amazing, however. The process of creating it, maintaining it, and growing it year after year over the course of 4 decades had extracted a cost that no tour revenue, figure, or ledger sheet could match. The empire existed. It caused genuine joy. However, something more subdued and delicate was building beneath the white bow tie. The silver locks and the grin that seemed to hold an endless supply of warmth. And it would finally demand to be taken seriously. Fame has a special brutality reserved for those who adore the famous. It doesn't make an announcement. It doesn't come in a single tragic event that may be lamented and forgotten. It builds up slowly and steadily over years and decades. In the time between leaving and returning, in the vacant chair at the dinner table, in the birthdays celebrated over the phone, in the slow understanding that the person you love is both everywhere and nowhere at all. Born Marjorie Doreen Reinen, André Rieu had known André since their adolescence in Maastricht. They had gone through the same circles, grown up in the same city, and recognized something in each other that neither of them could quite put their finger on. The Johann Strauss Orchestra was still more than 10 years away from being a reality when they got married in 1975, when André was 25. During those initial years, the marriage followed the typical routines of a young Dutch couple establishing a life together. André was a violin instructor. He participated in local ensembles. His dreams were unrealistic. Marjorie stood by him as the most unwavering witness to his desire rather than as an accessory. Before a single ticket was sold, she had faith in the orchestra. Before anyone else had any reason to believe in him, she did. Marjorie did not abandon the Johann Strauss Orchestra when it was established in 1987. She entered it. She became the structural backbone of everything André's creative instinct produced, in the quiet and generally unacknowledged manner that visionary spouses frequently do. She oversaw the company, negotiated the initial contracts, maintained the records throughout the years when they were intimidating to look at, and kept the group together during the protracted periods when there were few concerts and confidence was weaker than it seemed on the outside. Without Marjorie, there is no Johann Strauss Orchestra. Full stop, recalled a veteran orchestra acquaintance. André had the idea. Although Marjorie made it possible to live long enough for the vision to come to pass, survival came at a cost. Throughout the 1990s and early 2000s, Marjorie oversaw an organization that had surpassed all initial projections of its future as the orchestra and tour schedule developed. Pierre Music, born in 1976, and Marc, born in 1978, were the couple's two sons. Additionally, they were raised primarily by a father who was absent in practice but present in spirit during the years of the orchestra's rapid expansion. André spent months at a time on the road. By the mid-2000s, the tour schedule that had once looked doable had turned into an unrelenting machine that devoured everything it came into contact with, including time, presence, and the everyday texture of a life lived between two people who had made a commitment to do so. André rarely discussed this time period, and when he did, it was with the unique reserve of a